Hi, I'm Neil.
And I'm John.
And you're listening to World of Telly, the podcast where John and I watch every single TV programme ever made in no particular order. And what are we watching this week, John?
Harry's Game.
For anyone unfamiliar with this programme, Harry's Game was a 3-part drama miniseries set during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and it was broadcast over 3 consecutive nights on ITV in October 1982. It stars Ray Lonnan and Derek Thompson. It was directed by Lawrence Gordon Clark, and it was written by Gerald Seymour. Now, Gerald Seymour was originally a journalist, wasn't he, John?
Yes, he was. He worked for ITN in the early 60s. He covered the Vietnam War. He was there for the Munich Olympics massacre.
He covered Northern Ireland as well, didn't he?
And he covered Northern Ireland many times. He worked for ITN, and then he decided to go into started to write novels. And he got a massive advance. This was in around 1975, and wrote Harry's Game, the novel. It already sold the film rights to it, interestingly, back before it was published, actually. The book was already optioned, and it came out, I think it came out in the States earlier. And it just sold in those days of the kind of paperback bestsellers. It went absolutely tonto. And it's interesting that it took, even though the film rights were sold early on, obviously maybe people shied away from it because it's obviously about the Troubles, and the Troubles reached a particular fever pitch just the year before Harry's Game. So it was a controversial subject matter. Maybe that was a bit difficult to film. So in 1982, it was made into a series. And I can tell you, I've read the novel. I read it again recently. Gerald Seymour dramatised his own novel, and he obviously thought the novel was very good because it is almost identical. It is almost identical, quite strikingly. So I'll touch on some of the differences later. It's word for word, dialogues lifted word for word.
I guess one of the surprising things about this series, John, is that it was made by Yorkshire Television, of all people.
Yeah, Yorkshire were trying to sort of invest more in drama. I mean, they were one of the kind of big companies, big ITV companies. They were expected to contribute something into the network, and they'd had quite a success with the Sandbaggers, 3 series it ran for, very kind of bleak about security services basically, and it was starring Ray Lonnan, who obviously is in Harry's Game. And I think a lot of it came out of that. Sandbaggers came to an end because the writer of the Sandbaggers died a mysterious death in a plane, and was meant to be involved in all sorts of shenanigans to do with the intelligence services. And so that series came to an end. They were going to do a 4 series of Sandbaggers, but that came to an end, and maybe partly this was sort of filling the drama gap.
So Harry's Game is about the Troubles. I always hate calling it the Troubles. It always makes it sound like it was an inconvenience.
Well, I think part of it is because it was, a kind of unparalleled kind of occurrence in a way, wasn't it? And part of the British government's kind of deal with this was that they didn't want to refer to terrorists. They just wanted to kind of class them as criminals. One of the big kind of controversies was that both the IRA and loyalists, terrorists, wanted to be able to wear their own clothes in prison and not get treated like prisoners. And that was one of the things that led to the hunger strike and various things like that. So, as I mentioned, in 1974, I think was the heaviest casualties over the Troubles, and there were just so many people dying. It was an extremely violent time, and it wasn't really perceived as being something that you should dramatize, something that should basically be...
It was taboo.
Yeah, it was taboo, and it was anything around it was controversial for obvious reasons. And I think even as kind of like in the period of the early 80s, Harry's Game couldn't help but be controversial just because of its subject matter.
Yeah, I remember it being controversial when it came out, and I was way too young to see it, but I remember people talking about it all the time and people saying it shouldn't be made. And I don't know about you, John, but in the time that Harry's Game was out, I remember going into town in Coventry and constantly being evacuated from department stores. It was really in the air, that whole sense of fear and danger around the IRA.
Well, yes, and of course in the 70s, in that neck of the woods, the Birmingham pub bombings happened, and that was why it was all very fraught. I mean, I can't say, even as a child, that I learnt stuff, apart from watching stuff on the news. Famously, John Craven's news round features images of the Maze Prison dirty protests, which was quite something for John Craven's news round to cover.
Sands was in jail for terrorist crimes, but he demanded that people like himself should get special treatment in prison. The British government has said no to those demands. And only yesterday, when she made a surprise visit to Northern Ireland, the Prime Minister, Mrs Thatcher, repeated her statement that people who had committed crimes should be treated like criminals and nothing more.
Aside from that, there were a series of books by a writer, Joan Lingard, that are known as the Kevin and Sadie books.
Right.
And they follow two children from Belfast on either side, Catholic and Protestant, who eventually fall in love and eventually get out of Northern Ireland and go to live in London to escape the problems caused by their relationships by moving to London. They were really kind of effective stories and a really interesting way of telling the story of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. So that was probably the first fictional representation that I was aware of.
There had been some dramatisations, hadn't there, before Harry's Game?
Yeah, again, even things that were ostensibly not political, or if you could do something political about Belfast and the Troubles in Northern Ireland, it always caused trouble, particularly with the BBC, which is interestingly, Harry's Game is on the commercial network. The BBC, the Play for Today series, Play for Today, there was a certain quota were made by Scotland, there was a certain quota, some were made by Wales, not as many. And, there was obviously an intent to have some stories from Northern Ireland. But the BBC governors invariably got involved. One play in particular, I think the early one, the name escapes me briefly, was portraying historic events. But even historic events were seen as being too close to the bone. And in 1975, there was a play by John Hare, a Play for Today, called The Dandelion Clock. That's one of the first dramas set in the Troubles. It was originally going to be filmed in Belfast, but because of the horrific events that were going there, it wasn't deemed feasible and it's too dangerous for people to go there. But it seemed really frowned upon, and it's quite weird because it's the only play from that particular season of Play for Today that's been wiped.
Was that on purpose?
I don't know. It just sticks out like a sore thumb,
Yeah.
though. Because by then they were keeping the single plays, and that the kind of wiping had kind of gone, largely anyway. Then there was a writer, a really good writer called Stuart Parker, who wrote a number of plays, both for the BBC and ITV. There's one called Catchpenny Twist, which was about a couple of teachers who become musicians and start to write, and they fall foul of the sectarian tensions. A really nice play called I'm a Dreamer Montreal, which was an ITV play set in Belfast. And then there was another excellent play just after Harry's Game, I think, or maybe 1981, called Iris in the Traffic, Ruby in the Rain. So they were all, they were made, but invariably, it was very sensitive. And I suspect part of it was that people wanted to make things. There were others as well. I haven't named them all, but they wanted to do them. But they just sometimes thought, inevitably the BBC governors are going to get involved. It's going to be tense. You couldn't possibly expect it to be a straightforward thing to make anything set in Northern Ireland, which seems weird now, especially when you've got things like Blue Lights, the cop drama, which is just about to finish on BBC, gone into its third series, but then it was, a very different time, and it was just too controversial a lot of the time.
And what about the Long Good Friday? Does this have any influence?
Yeah, it's a good question, because that was originally a TV play.
Wasn't it originally going to be Euston Films?
Well, it got offered to Euston, and then it went to Black Lion Films, which was a sort of equivalent to Euston for ATV. Lou Grade was going to fund it. And then he found out what it was about, and it was called, what was it called? The Paddy Factor. Basically, then it ended up being a film. And that's just another example of, even something which is ostensibly not necessarily about the Troubles, it features the IRA, and therefore was seen to be beyond the pale.
And there's a connection between Harry's Game and The Long Good Friday and some of the cast members. Well, one cast member.
Yeah, Derek Thompson.
Yeah, we'll get onto him in a minute. Now, Harry's Game wasn't a single play. It was a mini-series, I'd guess you'd call it. And it was quite unusual, I'm guessing, for it to be shown on consecutive nights. That didn't happen very often, did it?
No, it was a real kind of event TV. It happened after that. I'm struggling to think if there was an example before Harry's Game, but it's certainly... presenting it as a block like that was very effective, and I remember it because I watched it at the time. I was old enough by then.
I wasn't allowed.
Really?
Yeah,
Right.
I was too young. I was about 11, so that I was no way. No, I didn't see it.
It was designed to be a popular peak time. It was designed to be a thriller. It is a thriller. I mean, it has some pretensions to exploring what's happening in Northern Ireland, but it is absolutely meant to be, and it features the assassination of a British parliamentarian. And, that was happening. That was happening in real life a lot. And so, therefore, it was immediately leaving itself open to the idea that it was kind of like either glamorizing the terrorists or giving them some kind of legitimacy, because you see their ordinary lives as they're living in Belfast, as well as the killing that they indulge in as well. So it was, in that sense, it was rather different to the single play set in Northern Ireland, because it Play for Today, even though they may have been controversial, there was a general perception that they were kind of worthy, or, a serious attempt to touch on some of the aspects and some of the themes of affecting people's lives in Northern Ireland. Whereas Harry's Game had no such excuse, really. And it did fall foul of real life events, because the hunger strikes that I mentioned in 1981 meant that Sinn Féin grew as a political force. There was the Hyde Park bombing in July 1982. And then, more pertinently, there was a terrible increase in sectarian killings in late 1982. And some were involving this guy called Lenny Murphy, who was a member of this infamous Shankill Butchers, a gang who went around just kind of murdering Catholics, but actually they were pretty indiscriminate about who they murdered. And he was such a kind of horrific guy that he was shot dead by the Provisional IRA, but they were actually tipped off by some loyalists, because even the loyalists wanted him out of the way because he was such a nightmare to have around. But that period, the upsurge in killings, it coincided almost exactly with the transmission of Harry's Game.
Right.
And this led to kind of some issues, really, because you'd have Harry's Game would finish at 5 to 10, and then straight away there'd be the news at 10, and it would sometimes literally start with a story about sectarian killings in Northern Ireland. So you were straight into it. So it hit a few snags because of that, in terms of, is this what we should be having on the TV?
Were there any calls for it not to be shown? I seem to remember that happening.
There were definitely. That they related it. In fact, Airy Neve, who was killed by the INLA, not the IRA, at Westminster, at the Houses of Parliament, a couple of years before, his widow suggested that the programme shouldn't be shown, and related it particularly, and said, particularly in this difficult and sensitive situation that's happening now in Northern Ireland. So, and a few people supported that. But it's interesting, looking back, the response was sort of along the lines of, we made this quite a few months ago, why on earth would we not show it? And it seemed rather blunt, just to say we're showing it.
I think it's very interesting the way that the IRA themselves are portrayed in the program, which we might get into in a bit more detail later. It wasn't what I expected at all. I expected them to be purely the bad guys, but it's a little bit more subversive than that, I think.
And that's the problem. I think, that's what we've talked about how, if you start showing people who it's easier to say that these people are all horrific murdering monsters than if you show their human side. And that came up again a few years later, which we'll get onto.
When the program opens with the assassination by Derek Thompson of the politician, you're sort of placed in his shoes, aren't you? You're kind of placed in a viewer position of wanting him to get away, whether you want him to or not. I'm not saying it's sympathetic to the IRA. I don't think it's sympathetic to one side or the other, but it certainly doesn't glamorize it either.
No, definitely not.
And if you want to position yourself in the time and place when Harry's Game went out, I believe it was the day after Star Wars aired on ITV. Is that right?
Star Wars on the Sunday. First time it was shown was in 1982. I remember it well, and wore the tape to death. I remember I recorded it, but
did you not record Harry's Game?
I think we probably did, actually, because I think my dad was probably out, so he wanted to watch it when he came back, I think.
There's top entertainment this week on Thames. On Monday at 8, new comedy with a foxy lady.
I've just lost the printing department and my editorial staff.
At 9, the first of a 3-part thriller, a man undercover with a cunning that's Harry's Game.
The IRA shoot the intelligence men, they lay their hands on them. They torture them, they hood them, and they shoot them. But we've got to have the man who killed Danby.
Great drama, top comedy coming this week on Thames.
A week today, James Bond is back in From Russia with Love, but now with subtitles on page 199 of Oracle, the spectacular Star Wars.
So most of the programme, not all of it, but most of it is filmed in Leeds, and Leeds stands in for Belfast. And I've got to say, I was shocked when I discovered that, because it looks incredibly authentic.
It does. I mean, it's so bleak, and the kind of condition of the area, it's like threads, because it's it's supposed to be like the Falls Road, and it's just as it was, or portrayed as a war zone, but the kind of crumbled, demolished houses, because there was so much bombing had gone on in the 70s that basically the place was falling to pieces. But they obviously thought, even when they were out in Belfast, they went out with a skeleton crew. And I think Ray Lonan says in the DVD extra that basically they couldn't hang around in a group with a camera for very long. in Northern Ireland because everybody was treated with suspicion. So they did most of it in Leeds, but they managed to upset lots of locals in Leeds as well because the TV company were going to film it in an area, film basically riots and petrol bombs and all of that kind of thing. And they were filming that in an area, they proposed to film it in an area that had just been devastated in the 1981 riots, which were all around the country in 1981. And basically they were sort of like, they'd just start getting a street and area back together, and suddenly a TV company's going to come in and bomb the place. So they weren't happy, so they actually changed their mind and moved to a different part of Leeds. But I'm guessing it was sort of an area that was in partial demolition anyway, because it just looks incredible.
And I believe the British Army weren't happy either. They didn't give any assistance with any of the equipment or the tanks or anything like that, did they?
No, not at all. And again, it goes back to, they don't want to be supportive of any enterprise to do with fictionalising the Troubles.
Mm-hmm. Although the RUC were very helpful, apparently.
Yeah. Something favourable to say about the RUC.
Yes, doesn't happen very often. So let's talk about the plot of this thing and who's in it. The main guy we've mentioned briefly already is Ray Lonnan, who people would have known primarily for the Sandbaggers. He was also a semi-regular on Z-Cars. I think he's in the Rabies episode, isn't he?
Yeah, he was one of the senior commanders in Z-Cars for a couple of series, and he would have been in the last series of Z-Cars, but he got the offer from the Sandbaggers. They'd written the scripts for Z-Cars, and basically they had to hire someone else and change the name on the script because it was definitely going to be Ray Lonnan. But yeah, he got a better offer, and he was quite the heartthrob, Ray Lonnan, quite the heartthrob. He had a lot of admirers, even through the time. And I mean, Z-Cars, it's not hard to stand out as good looking in the cast of Z-Cars. They all look like, in need of a decent vegetable every now and again and things like that. But he looked kind of this tanned, kind of slightly incongruously handsome man.
He plays the eponymous Harry, and I guess he's like a more realistic James Bond figure, isn't he?
He's in the army, basically. He's a military man, and his big thing was that he'd been undercover. Harry had been undercover in, where was it?
Oman, I think.
Oman, yes, and he'd basically been undercover there for quite some time and in an extremely dangerous situation, which is why they try and use him to go undercover in Belfast, because his character is supposed to have been born in Northern Ireland. Just very briefly, the plot's very simple,
yeah,
isn't it? It's Derek Thompson's playing Billy Downs. As we mentioned, he, under the orders of the IRA, assassinates a member of the British government. The army in Northern Ireland and the advisors to the Prime Minister, just want to treat it normally. But the Prime Minister, who is a friend of the person who's assassinated, insists on there being direct action and effectively wants Billy Downs, the Derek Thompson character, to be killed. And so, independently of the army in Northern Ireland and their usual connections, Harry is sent in within a few weeks' notice to try and track the person down. It's extremely, obviously, suicidally dangerous in a place like one area of Belfast and the Falls Road. And he goes out to Northern Ireland, and it's dangerous because the army don't know who he is. So that adds to the danger of it.
Prime Minister wants a man in the Falls of Belfast, in the heart of Provoland. It will be a highly secure operation mounted from London and not from Belfast. The agent will have the express and only task of listening for any word on the identity of the man who killed Henry Danby.
I think what's very subversive about it, again, you're expecting it maybe to be like a James Bond kind of thing, but as soon as he gets there, people start being suspicious of his accent. He's very bad at being a spy.
It's interesting because, they notice his accent's all over the place right at the start. So Charles Lawson, who plays Jim in Coronation Street, instantly recognises that there's something funny going on. Yeah, you're right. He stands out. He kind of acts slightly oddly. And he also is Ray Lonnan. He's very handsome. And I was talking about this with Shirley. He's brooding and kind of handsome. He stands out. He's not like, you'd think he picks someone a bit less conspicuous for it. So there's an improbability there, I think.
He's very lucky, isn't he? Ingratiates himself with a woman that he meets within a few hours of arriving, and she just happens to be the right person to get involved with to tell him what's going on with the IRA. It's a wacky coincidence.
It is just, there's a lot of implausible stuff in it. even down to character Ian Bleasdale, in fact, from Casualty, like Derek Thompson, who played the ambulance driver for ages, is a waiter in a hotel and happens to overhear the generals fulminating about the fact that the British government have put an undercover man in. I mean, apart from talking so loudly about it in a restaurant anyway, but you just happen to have the waiter there who's working for the IRA.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of those kind of happenstance things going on in there.
I think it's great in the sense that the British are shown to be incompetent, the IRA are shown to be incompetent, everything's sort of accidental, there's no grand plan. And that's quite realistic, I think. It could have so easily have been like a boy's own adventure if they hadn't been careful.
Yeah.
It's much more realistic.
As I said, the book's exactly like that. The only thing I'd say about the book is obviously it being a book, you get to hear Harry's thoughts. Harry's thoughts are described about what's going on, whereas the thing about the TV version is Harry doesn't say much. And I think Ray London says this in the DVD extra. It's quite a small part in the sense that he doesn't have anything like as much screen time as Derek Thompson. But because he's so taciturn, you don't get much of what's going on in his head. There might have been a way to dramatize that a bit more. But in practice, he comes across as being an extremely kind of silent, brooding man.
The main problem I have with Harry's game is that it's too short. It feels like it needed a bit longer to get that sense of dread. You don't really get the sense of dread that Harry's about to be uncovered. The only way you get that sense of dread is that his handler back in England's constantly saying, Harry could be killed at any moment, but you never really get a sense of that.
No, and it's interesting because the book, Dad, you just reminded me, there's a bit in the book actually where originally the plan isn't quite as dangerous because they send Harry in, but he's going to be living in lodgings well away from the Falls Road, but it's Harry himself who decides he's going to go right into the lion's den. So he has and again, that's instantly slightly more interesting psychologically about what Harry's doing. But no, you're right. He does things like they can't get hold of him. He has to contact them and all of these kind of things, which means that Benjamin Whitrow, who plays his runner back in the thing, is just in a constant state of anxiety and has a slightly weird relationship with the other guy who's constantly making him a cup of coffee.
It's so homoerotic.
It is ridiculous, isn't it? It's like, they're sparking, those two.
The British come across as quite stereotyped, aren't they? It's all jolly hockey sticks. And like I said, they're quite incompetent. The Geoffrey Chater character gets in the way, doesn't he? Rather than helping Harry, he puts Harry in more danger.
It's the turf wars as well, isn't it? He's annoyed because this person's been put in, and he doesn't, until sort of closer to the end, realise that, of course, this guy's in tremendous danger, and he shouldn't drag his feet over the stuff that he's dragging his feet over. Yeah, it's interesting.
I think for me, the most compelling character and the most interesting character isn't Harry. It is Billy Downs, played by Derek Thompson. Because Derek Thompson's character does not want to be doing the things that he's doing. He's been placed in this position in much way that Harry's been placed in his position. He has no great joy for what he's doing. You can tell that he's under a lot of pressure, and you do kind of sympathise with him, I think.
Yeah, it is an interesting character, and I just think because of the fact that his wife's having such a terrible time all the time, that she looks old before her time. He lives in a really kind of quite grim terraced house, and as you say, it's resolutely unglamorous, and it's almost like a kind of fatalistic approach that he takes, isn't it? He's just he's like a kind of automaton.
He's a puppet, isn't he? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, his wife becomes very important and plays a pivotal role. She's not even given a name.
All these men and one wee house and one wee girl alone with their kids. And it takes all of you with your bloody guns and Saracens.
Roof's clear, sir.
You know why we want him. You know what he did. We'll go on till we get him. If we have to rip this house to pieces each week, we'll go on till we get him. Try asking him what he does with himself. What he did last month in London. Try asking the little shit.
Now, let's talk about Derek Thompson before we move on. Now, people are going to know Derek Thompson for playing Charlie Fairhead in Casualty. I think he played that part for, 30 years or something like that?
Something insane like that, yeah.
He just left last year, I believe.
Yeah.
Now, he's got an interesting career, hasn't he?
Yeah, interesting. He was born in Belfast,
Mm-hmm.
and his dad was a singer, used to go around the sort of kind of clubs. And Derek formed a song and dance act with his sister, and they became known as the singing duo Elaine and Derek. I'd sort of heard that he started as a singer, and I think, again, Ray Lonnan mentions it. But the whole family moved out of Belfast when Derek was 12, so Elaine and Derek could attend the Italia Conti talent school. I just thought, they'd done the odd song, but actually they'd brought out several albums. They're on YouTube if you want to listen to them.
Shall we have a quick listen now?
Let's do that.
There's a friend for little children
above the bright blue sky, a friend who never changes, whose love can never die.
So they had minor hits with this, did they?
Yeah, they certainly had a hit at least, and you know, I can imagine grannies of a certain age and granddads sitting there mawkishly listening to this kind of stuff, which, you know, God, when you've heard a minute of it, you've heard enough. You don't need to really listen to any more. But of course, this meant that when Derek Thompson was wanted to become an actor, and he sort of moved away from the career, he was around for quite a long time before he had a real break. And he worked in experimental theatre, and I'm pretty confident that that's what led to him appearing in Rock Follies, the second series, because Rock Follies is basically, when we get to it, it'll be a riot, because basically everything about Rock Follies, all the people in it were all on the experimental theatre scene in London, because he used to be in plays by people like Howard Brent and the kind of left-wing theatre from that time, and I'm sure that's how he got into Rock Follies. He then got into The Gentle Touch with Jill Gascoigne, the sort of ITV's woman cop equivalent, I suppose, to Juliet Bravo, except she's a detective. She's not in uniform. And he was her sidekick. That sounds a bit harsh. He was the sidekick in The Gentle Touch for a few series, not all of them. Obviously got another big break in The Long Good Friday, where he's not playing an Irish person in that one.
He's brilliant in
He's
that.
absolutely
Fantastic.
brilliant in it. He plays the kind of like the main support for Bob Hoskins, but he's very ill-advised in what he does.
Again, a villain that you feel sympathetic to. There's something about Derek Thompson. He sort of invites empathy, doesn't he?
Yeah, he played another IRA terrorist a few years later in something called The Price, which was a 6-part drama series which on Channel 4 starring Peter Barkworth. Again, he plays a sort of slightly agonized terrorist in a similar vein. And it just never ceases to amaze me that I was aware of Derek Thompson being in some really good things, really intense, dramatic things. So Longer Friday, Harry's Game, The Price, and so on. So it still slightly amazes me that he ended up playing Charlie, a slightly boring character. But then, as you say, there's something about the empathy that you feel towards Derek Thompson's characters. Maybe that's really what they wanted in something like Casualty for a main character.
In a way, it's kind of disappointing. I'd like to have seen what he would have done with a career that if he'd broken out of that role. You mentioned Derek Thompson now, everyone just thinks Casualty.
That's true, but as soon as he got out of Casualty, he went straight into the second series of Blue Lights, interestingly.
He has an incredible perm in this series. He looks fantastic. Yeah, I think it should be called Billy's Game.
Billy's Game, but then that would have set the cat amongst the pigeons even more, wouldn't it? It's about what's our new drama about an IRA terrorist?
There are some other familiar faces in this thing. Linda Robson turns up, most known for Birds of a Feather. She's in Out as well, isn't she?
Yeah, she's in Out. She plays the girlfriend of Frank Ross's son, very briefly in that.
And in this, she's a member of a family that sort of puts Billy up when he's on the run, when he's just done the job, sort of the safe house.
Yeah.
And the IRA get wind of the fact that she may have slipped up and telling people who he was. And there's a really harrowing scene where they arrest her and she takes her own life in the cell. It's very harrowing, that.
It is. It's one of the more effective bits of the programme, isn't it? But I'm not knocking her Northern Irish accent, but I found it so incongruous because she was around Linda Robson in things like Pauline's Quirks, children's TV programmes. I've seen her for years before Harry's Game, and so used to her being a sort of Cockney, and suddenly she's got this very strong Northern Irish accent. I just found it impossible to get my head round.
He had a hand like an old man's. It was all tied up like a claw. I can't say how it was. It was awful.
What's his name? I want his name.
You'll get me killed for what I've said. What do they do with tights? So help me, Mother, we never knew his name.
All the accents sounded fine to me, but I'm not an expert. I don't really know Northern Ireland that well, but I think everyone did really well. I had no idea Derek Thompson was born in Belfast, for example, so I'm guessing his was quite accurate.
Yeah, and I think I would bow to the journalist who was writing in the Belfast Telegraph. He didn't really like Harry's Game very much. But he did say that the accents were not bad in the main. So whilst that's not glowing, it's pretty good, I think, from someone who's actually Northern Irish.
Another familiar face we mentioned very briefly, Charles Lawson, who's now most known as playing Jim MacDonald for, I think, about 20 years on Coronation Street. He's very good in this as well, I think.
Good performance as a really snivelling kind of wretch who then sort of meets his end quite amusingly after a fashion.
Another guy that we've mentioned a couple of times on this podcast, Sean Caffrey, who's in Edge of Darkness.
Yeah, he plays the inspector, the police inspector in the RUC, doesn't he? Called Howard Rennie. It's another very good performance by Sean Caffrey, very convincing. And the character of Howard Rennie is actually in some other Gerald Seymour books.
So there's an extended universe.
There's an extended universe to everything, I think, Neil. That's the thing. I haven't read those books, though, so I don't know how big a character he is in it.
Oh, that's terrible research, John.
I slap my wrist.
Now, the director of this is Lawrence Gordon Clark, and he's probably most well known, not for Harry's Game, but for Christmas ghost stories.
Yeah, absolutely. He did the Ghost Story for Christmas. He directed some. I think he wrote one, didn't he? As well. I shouldn't say that really, because John Deere, the expert on all things Christmas ghost stories, will be shouting at his podcast player. Hello, John. But no, Lawrence Gordon Clark is really, he went on after the Christmas, but he did lots of things. He did Minder. He did quite a few series. He did that weird series Chimera. Remember that?
Oh, the Stephen Gallagher.
Yeah, the Stephen Gallagher one where everybody dies in the first episode. and over the end credits, the continuity announcer said, and we'll be back next week with Chimera and a completely new cast. I mean, I thought the direction on it was pretty good. I mean, certainly the scenes, as we talked about, around Belfast, kind of war-torn Belfast, were really impressive. It looked,
oh yeah,
like quite big budget, quite cinematic, didn't it?
I'm very surprised that Harry's Game has never been remade as like a feature film in a more modern take of it. It's such a simple story, isn't it?
It is. Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe the story's too simple now, and it's a bit maybe what's the word? It's a bit kind of almost like very symmetrical, but we'll maybe get to that when we talk about.
Yes, now before we get into the spoilers, because I don't want to spoil this for anybody, where can people watch Harry's Game?
It's on YouTube. Weirdly, because I did like it when I originally saw it, I didn't have it on DVD, but I picked it up off eBay for about a tenner.
I noticed on the YouTube version, it says Harry's Game Episode 1, Episode 2, Episode 3, and uncensored, it says. Was there a censored version of Harry's Game that I'm not aware of?
I don't know is the answer, but my immediate instinct is to think that they're talking about the three-parter, because there was a one-off repeat, edited down slightly.
I see, yes.
That was repeated, and I suspect they're thinking it's not exactly like it's been censored, it was cut for time. And it had some shaved off, and it was repeated a few years, and it was called Harry's Game, the movie.
That was repeated the following year, wasn't it?
Yeah, basically. It was like Saturday night, I think it was, late night.
So the ending is very bleak. We can get into the ending now. I love the ending. I think the ending's fantastic, although it is quite contrived. But basically what happens is Billy and Harry end up confronting each other in the terrace street that Billy lives on. And after Harry shoots Billy, he's walking off into the sunset, and there's two soldiers in a house opposite keeping watch on what's happening, and they think he's a terrorist, and they just shoot him.
And then just to compound the issue, Billy's wife comes over and shoots him dead.
The fact that the army shoot him reminded me of Night of the Living Dead, where they just mistake him for the enemy.
I suppose at the time, it seemed like such an intractable problem, Northern Ireland, that it sort of fits that mood, because particularly when it went out, as I say, there was some terrible kind of sectarian violence going on. It was almost like everybody was just trapped. Everybody was trapped in it. No one could get out, even the Billy character. His ethic is that he wouldn't shoot a kid. He wouldn't shoot Rennie's kid in order to shoot him. So he's disillusioned, and that's a classic kind of thing, isn't it? The disillusioned terrorist goes back to James Mason in Odd Man Out in the 50s. Everybody's sort of trapped on a path, and no one seems to be able to break out of it. And so that's, I think, why the ending's quite effective.
The Brits have put a man in to find you. You, Billy. Find you and kill you. Now, we'll lift him this morning, and after we've talked with him, we'll hood him. You'll shoot him, like you shot Danby, like you should have shot Rennie. I've got a bullet hole. One more. After we'll slip you out to Donegal. Get the woman and kids down to you. First.
And then the beautiful theme tune. Now, I think a reason why this program lives on in the imagination or the consciousness of a lot of people, including myself, who never actually saw it, is the fact that the theme music is probably even more famous than the programme itself. And I believe that Clannad got a number 5 hit single with it.
They did, yeah. They'd been around a while. They'd been around since 1970. I think there's 2 families within the group. And Gerald Seymour knew them from when he was a journalist in Belfast. He used to go and listen to them in clubs. And he really liked them, and he actively lobbied to get them to record the theme tune. They went on to quite famously do Robin of Sherwood.
Probably on the back of this, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're also famous, Clannad, because one of their members who left just before Harry's game was Enya.
She must have been really annoyed by that at the time.
Well, she didn't have to be annoyed for very long, did
No.
she? Because I think she actually left with the manager of Clannad because she wanted to move on. And I think Clannad weren't so keen on the direction that this manager was taking them in.
Mm-hmm.
Anya decided to go because she liked the sound of that, and she ended up making more money than God. Just quickly go back to the ending. One thing I've remembered is that the big difference with the book is that ending is in there, but there's several chapters after it.
What happens in the aftermath?
It's kind of boringly played out. It's not very interesting. You see Harry's family go to the funeral. They tidy it up, and it's how they sort of tell the story to the public of what actually happened. And they sort of paint Harry as a hero who got caught in crossfire rather than being shot by the British Army. And it sort of tidies everything up, but it's not particularly interesting. And all the sort of dramatic impetus goes out of it as soon as Harry and Billy die. So even though it is very abrupt, the ending, it actually makes sense because in order to drag it on a bit longer, it's just boring admin, really. Otherwise, as I said, it's really very, very similar indeed.
I just think it needed another episode, really, just to ramp up that tension a little bit more. You never really feel that he's on the brink of being caught.
Yeah, you're not quite. For instance, Harry has a romantic interest, though he obviously uses her to find out about what's going on and try and track down Billy. And she gets roughed up by the IRA.
I thought they were going to kneecap her or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's more with her after the fact as well. There's a little bit more with her. And it's a bit unsatisfactory. You don't really see what actually happens. You sort of know that they haven't killed her.
They've just cut her hair off, haven't they?
Yeah, basically, that's right. But
she gets off lightly compared to Linda Robson, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Apparently there's a Doctor Who reference in there somewhere that you haven't told me about yet.
Well, when Shirley and I were watching it, we found it very funny at the end when Harry commandeered a car and just happened to get a car with a driver who was like an incredible stunt driver. He's supposed to be like a salesman, very nervous of what's going on, and then does all these handbrake turns and God knows what else, and he's clambering along. And we genuinely found this hysterical. So I was watching the end credits. The salesman is played by, and here's the link, Gareth Milne. And Gareth Milne plays Lord Cranley in Black Orchid. He's a stuntman, but he dabbled a bit in acting as well when he needed something physical. He was obviously a stunt driver as well. So basically, the one who gets killed at the end of Black Orchid, the one they've got hidden in the loft.
The one who throws himself off the top of the roof.
Exactly.
Right.
That's Gareth Milne, and he's the driver. So it
Wow,
all
I never would have
made
guessed
sense.
that.
It all made sense as soon as I saw his name. And I mean, I know it's a bit niche, but I burst out laughing when I saw his name. I'm like, my God, no wonder he could drive.
Come on, quick. Run straight over.
I can't.
Straight over! Overtake!
We'll be killed!
Overtake!
So how did Harry's game go down with the British public?
It went down well, but it didn't hit the top 10, interestingly.
Oh, really?
No, it didn't hit the top 10. It hit the top 20 for one episode, I think it was.
I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, because it got a lot of publicity and it got that primo slot 3 days running. But maybe that worked against it. Sometimes stripping things, there was BBC started doing at one point, didn't they? Before we all got kind of taken over by iPlayer and things like that and streaming. But they used to put programs on Monday to Friday.
That Torchwood series.
I was just going to say that because they did it with others and invariably the ratings started to tail off quite badly towards the end of the week. Whereas Torchwood, weirdly, because everybody thought it was the death slot for Torchwood because of the fact that it finished it off, it actually got more ratings as the week went on. The problem with putting everything on, as you say, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, is that's it, it's gone. It doesn't have time to build the tension of what's going to happen next. So it maybe suffered a little bit from that.
Do you think ITV did that on purpose just to get it out of the way?
I'm always suspicious of things like that, particularly when it wasn't a very normal way of doing things. It's maybe like, let's rip the plaster off.
So after Harry's game, were there more dramatic representations of what was going on in Northern Ireland?
Things got a lot worse. The situation in Northern Ireland got worse, and the government, and obviously it was a Thatcher government at the time, were very hard line with this, and it became even more controversial if drama went anywhere near some of these programs. And the controversies got worse and worse. And then we were talking about how you see in Harry's game Billy, the IRA terrorist, at home with his wife, with his kids. Well, there was a documentary in the mid-80s called Real Lives at the Edge of the Union, which had it was a documentary, but it showed Martin McGuinness and a loyalist equivalent going around their day-to-day business, and the government were absolutely infuriated by this.
Right.
Because it was sort of like he was the chief of staff, basically, of the IRA, and they were showing him sort of picking his kids up from school.
Humanising him, yeah.
Exactly, and that's why it got very, very... And it was at absurd levels. The famous one is that the Star Trek Next Generation episode, of all things, which features a reference in it to the date of the year of Irish unification, they suppressed the whole episode.
The whole episode?
I believe so. The first time round.
That's crazy.
They lost the whole episode.
It's just one line.
Yeah, I know. It seems absurd now, but this is how incredibly sensitive, while the Troubles were still at the pitch they were at.
I've been reviewing the history of armed rebellion, and it appears that terrorism is an effective way to promote political change.
Yes, it can be. But I have never subscribed to the theory that political power flows from the battle of a gun.
Yet there are numerous examples when it was successful. The independence of the Mexican state from Spain, the Irish unification of 2024, and the Kenzie Rebellion.
Yes, I'm aware of them.
Then would it be accurate to say that terrorism is acceptable?
And the craziest thing is the dubbing of the voices over the news broadcasts. That's the weirdest thing. I can't even believe that happened.
Because Sinn Féin got kind of better and better, I guess, at politics, the government actually put a law into action where they couldn't be heard. And so people interviewed them. You got actors like Stephen Ray to dub over exactly what they'd said. Now, of course, it was memorably parodied, wasn't it, in the day-to-day when Sinn Féin representatives had to breathe in helium, so they had squeaky voices. It was utterly ludicrous. And I think the thing is, and I'm not, the Troubles were a terrible time, and no solution would have been perfect. But the uncomfortable truth, I think, in the end, was that saying you don't talk to terrorists, in the end, they did talk to terrorists. And in the end, all the stuff about not treating them as if they were in a war or as if they were simply monsters without families and things like that. In the end, you were just shying away from the only thing that would actually resolve the problem, even if it's a massively imperfect thing that happened. So it got very tough after Harry's game. I mean, if Harry's game was they came up with the idea for it a few years later, I don't think they would have made it because it was all too sensitive at that point.
What are you going to do if you find him?
He's not for capturing. He's dead if I get close to him.
Because a man kills a politico, you come here.
That's what I came for, yes.
2,000 have died here since it began, and you're here because of one of them.
One of them.
Oh, yeah, why was he so special?
Look, they killed the cabinet minister as a test of strength. They challenged us. Look, either we pick up the challenger or they've won. That's the game.
So what happened to Ray Lonnan after this? I thought for some reason that Ray Lonnan died really young because he just disappeared.
He did. He didn't do an awful lot. It was strange. He was in that, what was it called? The Brief, where he played a solicitor. It was quite a big one. I think he's did the classic working in theatre, did the odd episode of TV drama, but that's about it unless you're going to count
Budgie the helicopter.
Exactly.
Let's not talk about that.
No, let's move away from Budgie the helicopter. But no, he was apparently, I know people who have met him, and he was apparently an absolutely lovely guy. Really, really nice guy.
Would you recommend Harry's Game, John?
Yes.
Me too. I think it's very unusual for when it was made. I was expecting it to be a lot more black and white. It's much more of a grey area. I think it's ahead of its time in that respect.
As you say, it's short, it goes at a fair clip, doesn't it? It's not it's not too shabby in that respect. And it's good. There's good performances in it. There's a couple of ropey ones, but there's, generally speaking, I just think Derek Thompson, he's one of those actors who You sometimes can think, is he just being incredibly good because he's being so minimalist, or is he literally doing nothing? It's
I know what you mean. Yeah, it's a fine line.
Yeah, and I suppose there's a limit in 30 years of Casualty of what you can actually do. But I've always had a soft spot for Derek Thompson, and I did like the early days of Casualty were very good indeed. But I've always had a kind of soft spot for him. Every time I turned something on with Derek Thompson in, it was really good. That was the sort of general rule of thumb.
Okay, John, that's Harry's game done and dusted. What are we doing next time?
Whoops Apocalypse.
What's Whoops Apocalypse, if anyone doesn't know?
How do you describe Whoops Apocalypse? Whoops Apocalypse is, I guess, a kind of a comedy about a nuclear apocalypse. And it features extremely broad parodies of politicians of all shapes and sizes.
Before we go, John, we've got some news about the blog. We're moving the blog to Patreon. We've got a Patreon. It's free to join. You don't have to pay us any money. And we set up the Patreon mainly to put uncut versions of the YouTube videos on there, because they're always constantly under risk of being taken down. But we thought it was a good idea to consolidate everything in one place. So if you're a member of the Beehive community, join the Patreon and you won't miss any of the blog entries.
I'll be sending out a message to the Beehive subscribers separately to tell them about this.
Until next time, I've been Neil.
And I've been John.
And you've been listening to The World of Telly.
You won't get out of here. Not with me on the end of your gun, you won't.